And we are live. So I chose this one image. But to sum it up, we're going to be talking about the historic wind event that has been going on for the last 24 hours in California and will continue, as you can see this red flag warning still showing up in Southern California. The other part of this image that gives a good summary of what's going on is the effects that we've already seen from this wind event. You can see if we zoom in around Santa Cruz, a number of these little hot spots popping up which indicate where there are fires. Now, I always say this, take this information with a grain of salt. These hot spots are basically infrared detections by a satellite in space, so exactly where it is and how accurate this isn't 100%, but it does give us a good idea, especially when we use this map along with other information that we will be looking at shortly here. So one of the fires that appears to be going on right now is this, what they're calling the Freedom Fire right here. So that's one that we're going to be looking at and I'll update you on, and then we're also going to look at the forecast to see how this fire might develop. And then you can see throughout the exact burn scar area where we had the CZU lightning complex, you see a number of these little hotspots. And something that I'd actually be curious to find out in the future, if I do find it out, I'll let you guys know, is if these are possibly reignitions from the CZU lightning complex fire that, I'll remind you, happened all the way back in August. Now, I know that sounds rather unbelievable considering there's been rain, this fire has technically been out for the last couple months, but there have been numerous research articles and recordings of fires actually still smoldering in really thick trees. This is an area that has lots of redwood trees, so the fire can actually smolder inside the tree or even underneath the ground in root systems for a number of months. And then when you have a massive wind event like the one we're seeing now, that fire can actually spark back up. So I'm certainly going to try to find out if some of these hotspots were actually ignited by the CZU complex that burned all the way back in August. So just looking at this map, we see the hotspots within that burn scar there. Not too worried about those because, again, it's in the burn scar. That's where a lot of this vegetation, a lot of the easily flammable vegetation that we have in this area has already been burned out by this fire that burned a couple of months ago. Where there is some concern is this fire right here. They're calling it the Panther Ridge Fire. And then down here we have the Freedom Fire. And I actually found a video of the Freedom Fire, if this still is up and working. So here you see it burning in the Santa Cruz Mountains. This is actually where I'm located, except I'm north of this location. But I can tell you the winds here were rather extreme last night. You can see how much the camera itself is shaking, which gives you a good idea of how strong the winds still are. And just looking out my window, the trees are still going. And last night it was even stronger. We had maybe 40, 50 mile per hour wind gusts coming through here. My power went out. That's why this forecast is coming so late to you today. And there's a number of branches down, and you can see this fire is certainly something that we have to keep our eye on. So when it comes to the information for the three big fires that I could identify right now, all of these are within that Santa Cruz area. We have the China Grade Fire, which looks like it has burned 20 acres, and it's already 50% contained. No evacuations with that one, so I would say with that one, we're looking pretty good. No evacuations, it's already 50% contained. I'd say that's looking pretty good. When it comes to the Freedom Fire, that's where my alert levels start to get a little bit higher, as even though it hasn't burned many acres, judging from that video, you could see it was burning pretty strong. There was a pretty decent fire plume coming off of that, and it's still 0% contained. And there are homes in the area. As you can see, there are 100 homes that have been evacuated. And then that other one that I pointed out, the Panther Ridge Fire, there are evacuations in place. Looks like 20 homes have been evacuated. but that is already up to 30% containment. So that's at least good to see there. And when it comes to the forecast, I'd say there's also some good news. There you can see the low pressure system that is really the culprit for this wind event happening in the first place. Basically, it's just pulling all this air right down into this really strong low pressure system. There's a strong pressure gradient here. That's why these winds are so intense and extreme right now, especially where they get funneled into canyons or on the downwind side of mountain ranges. But again, the thing that I'm most interested in right now is these fires burning in Santa Cruz. So let's take a look at the forecast to see what we can expect for these fires. The first thing I'll say, one, the fuels aren't anywhere near as dry as they were when I was forecasting all the fires this summer, so that right there is some good news. While the fuels are still dry, it's nowhere near as bad as they were this summer. And you can see basically evidence from what that camera was showing, how much that camera was shaking in that video. The winds are still strong throughout the area. You can see 47 miles per hour right now, but there is some good news. As we move forward, those winds are going to continue in Southern California. As I showed, we still have the red flag warning there, but they will quickly ease up around the Santa Cruz area. So I'm thinking firefighters are going to be able to handle these blazes relatively quickly and easily. As you can see, one of those fires was already at 50% containment. So this is showing 4 p.m. We should be getting closer to these winds dying down sometime in maybe the next 30 minutes. As you can see, dropping into the 30 miles per hour, then we get into the 20s. And as opposed to last night, you can see tonight, these are showing wind gusts. We're going to be in the teens, even getting down to 15 mile per hour wind gusts, which means the sustained winds probably going to be more like 5 miles per hour. So when it comes to these Santa Cruz fires, I would say the worst is definitely behind us, especially when it comes to the winds. Very extreme winds last night. I have a sister in Santa Cruz, and she even told me that it felt like a straight up hurricane there last night. I had a number of people text me from San Francisco, the East Bay, all saying that branches were coming down, bushes were blowing like crazy, felt like a hurricane. But the worst is behind us. As you can see, dying down over really the next 30 minutes, we should really start to see those winds push down. And then I was curious to see if they'd pick back up again tomorrow, and it looks like they're actually going to drop down tomorrow. So we got to 1 p.m. tomorrow. Wind gusts are showing 12 miles per hour, so we should be good when it comes to these 3 fires and how they're going to develop over the next 24 hours. The one other thing that's always important to look at, because this has the most direct influence on how dry the vegetation is, and especially those finer fuels that are really receptive to the atmosphere around them and are the culprits for fires being able to spread fast. The thing that influences those fuels the most is the relative humidity, and you can see it is pretty dry right now. We're in the 20s, which is relatively dry for wintertime. Again, if you're thinking back to my wildfire forecast this summer, 28% would have been great this last summer when we were in 3% and 5%. So right now, it's dry for this time of year, but it's not extreme. And there's some good news. Throughout the nighttime hours, we're going to be pushing up into the high 30s, maybe even 40s in some places. And that is another key difference from the fires that we had this summer. During the summer, I'll remind you, especially with the CZU lightning complex here, the relative humidity was staying in the single digits and low teens even through the nighttime hours. So very encouraging to see that winds are dying down and humidity is rising up to a pretty good level. So I'm really not too worried about those 3 fires that we've identified in Santa Cruz. Now, when it comes to the wind event in general, though, we're not in the clear yet. For the most part, in Northern California, I would say that high wind warning, even though it goes till 7 p.m., as I just showed on the map, in the next 30 minutes, the winds are really going to start dying down. So I think for Northern California, the worst is behind us. There is still that red flag, though, in Southern California. So that's another key area we're going to be focusing on. Just to show Northern California, warning again, goes till 7 p.m. We had some 45 to 65 mile per hour winds. Like I was saying, people were texting me saying it felt like a hurricane. Well, that's because some of the wind gusts actually were hurricane force. I still need to check the observations, but I would be amazed if we didn't get some reports in the 70 mile per hour range. But as you can see, winds dying down, and officially this warning disappears by 7 p.m. tonight. So we're looking good when it comes to Northern California. Let's just check out the wind gust forecast. Says through this evening, but like I said, the worst is behind us. Any major impacts that you might have felt due to this pretty intense, possibly historic wind event likely already happened. Now, it's a different story for Southern California, as the onset in Southern California and how long this wind event is lasting was almost shifted back 6 to 12 hours from what was true in Northern California. And there's a pretty simple reason for that, which I'll show you in a second. But basically, it's because this windstorm moved from north to south. So it pretty much makes sense that SoCal is going to get affected by this windstorm later, and longer for that matter. So when it comes to SoCal, looking at LA, there are still some major impacts possible, still the threat for wildfire. That's why we still have that red flag warning. Pretty much all Californians know a red flag warning is basically our version of a tornado warning. When you see that, you know things are serious. The two major variables that lead to a red flag warning, one, winds, and two, humidity, because that's the two things that have the largest effect on wildfire. When it comes to the humidity, that's because it creates these very dry fuels. And especially with the finer fuels, when the air is dry, the fuels get dry. And then if you've ever tried to start a campfire with a dry log or a moist log, pretty much makes sense which fire is going to start easier. So the danger there is any little spark that happens, if it's in a bunch of these dry fuels, that could quickly turn into a fire. And then that's where that fire can start to be influenced by these winds, and that's where wind has a major effect on fire. There's really three major ways that I would say are the key influences wind has on fire. One, it can just push the flames forward, just outright move the fire forward. Two, it blows in a bunch of oxygen into the fire, and if you've ever had a fire and you blew on it, you can see it immediately makes the fire stronger, hotter, larger. So it blows in oxygen, which is one of the key ingredients for a fire to grow and spread. Then the last thing it does, it can actually pick up burning embers, throw them miles ahead of the major blaze. It's called spotting, and start new little fires. So that's why Californians know that you take a red flag warning seriously. But even if we don't get any fires in Southern California, which I certainly am hoping we do not, crossing my fingers, knocking on wood, there's still the threat of some wind damage with winds 60 to 80 miles per hour, which is just unheard of. That's why I never like to use words like historic or extreme. I think when they're used too often, it's almost like the boy who cried wolf kind of scenario. But this is one of the largest windstorms of the last 10 years. So in this case, I'd say it's not crossing a line to use those words like potentially historic. As you can see, 80 mile per hour winds, about as extreme as you're ever going to see. So again, the two things we have to be worried about with that: red flag warning, meaning there's a threat for wildfire, and then just wind damage in general. It can take down power lines, take down trees. It can cause damage to your house. I actually had someone text me today saying that the windstorm in the East Bay knocked down one of the trees in their yard, went straight through their house while they were sleeping. So you got to take these things seriously, because especially when you have reports saying 60 to 80 miles per hour. So that's what's going on in LA. The one other place that I wanted to point out is San Diego, because this actually has some effect too. And you can see that they have those extreme winds. The red flag warning is in place down there. I really wanted to show this graphic because it brings up the fact that humidity is a pretty key aspect in this wildfire threat as well, for all the reasons I was just talking about, how it dries out fuels. And I'll actually show some fuel moisture charts in a second here. But you can see threat level high. So this is something you have to take serious, as really low humidity and winds 60 to 70 miles per hour in San Diego. And one other interesting thing about San Diego, there's actually a flood threat there right now. You can see flash flood watch and flood warning, and that's due to some rain. And I'll show you the rain charts in a second. I would be surprised if there's flash floods. Again, don't always take my word for it. If there's a warning, there's most likely a reason. But looking at the charts for the rain, I didn't see anything too extreme, but we'll go over those in a second. So the first thing I want to show you is just where this event came from in the first place. And it really started all with this little trough that built in through California and moved down the coast over the last 3 days. If you're a surfer in California, you've been loving this little trough because it's been causing offshore winds. Now, where this started to create a major windstorm and the high wind warning and the red flag warning and all the damage and possible wildfire threat is when it started to combine with this second system. And then this is a process that has been continuing throughout the day. So right here, you can see it's one system down here, another system up here. And then as we move through the day Tuesday, you can actually see these two systems combine into one. I'll go through that again because it's a pretty amazing graphic to look at. You have your two separate systems that combine into one. And when that happened, that's when we had some of those really extreme winds that knocked out my power, took down some trees, and led to some of those fires that we have right now in Santa Cruz. Now, the good news is you can see that where right here it has these very strong winds showing up, throughout really as we get into tonight for Northern California and then later into Wednesday for Southern California, you can see this system is just going to kind of weaken and then move off into the center of the country. And then we'll have nothing else to worry about. So I'll show it just one more time, just in case you missed it. Two separate systems combine into one massive cutoff low here. That's what caused and is causing these extreme winds that we're still dealing with, especially in Southern California. So that is where I want to focus now, is on what's going on in Southern California, as the majority of the action for Northern California is behind us. Now, I'll maybe just show that just in case you're just tuning into the live stream, but Northern California, this was at 1 p.m. You can see a lot of these very strong winds still sticking around 50, 60 miles per hour, really fueling that fire that we've seen in Santa Cruz. But then as we click into 7 p.m. tonight, officially when that high wind warning goes away, and then as we move further into the night, you can see those extreme winds just completely weaken, and we should be in the clear in Northern California really in the next 30 minutes to the next hour. Now, it's a little bit of a different story when we go down to Southern California. And part of the reason for that is really having to do with this graphic here. You can see it moved from north to south. So it makes sense that Southern California will be affected by this for a longer period of time. And you can actually see that low pressure system. And this is actually a perfect graph or a chart that shows how this works. Winds flow from high to low pressure, and then the lower the low and the higher the high over here, the steeper the gradient is. How I explained this yesterday is, if you think of a tray and you were to pour a glass of water on it and the tray was flat, that water would just sit there. So think of if this was just flat, the wind wouldn't be doing anything. It'd just be sitting over Southern California. Now, if you tilt that tray up a bit and then pour the water, the water's gonna flow down the tray pretty moderately and, at a medium speed. Then if you really tilt that tray up and pour the water, that's when it really starts flowing, and that's what's going on in California right now. We have this really low here, we have a high here, and it's creating this very steep gradient that's basically just pouring the wind down through Southern California. I'm not sure if that was a good little metaphor or analogy, whatever you call it, but that's how I like to picture these kinds of things, and you can really see it in action. There's the low pressure system there's the high, and then you have these winds just pouring down into the low. So this is showing right now in Southern California. You can see these winds still looking extreme. If we click in here, you can see 63 miles per hour. This is showing the wind gusts. And you can see low right there, these Santa Anas still rather extreme in Southern California, and it is continuing longer than Northern California. As you can see, 10 p.m. tonight, when all the action in NorCal is basically done, Southern California still gusting at about 55 miles per hour. Getting into 1 a.m., still around 50 miles an hour, and you can see that overall, throughout the majority of the region, it does weaken overnight, and the area that's affected by these extreme winds seems to shrink. But we do have these isolated spots, especially in some drainages and canyons, that will continue to see these extreme winds over the next 24 hours. So you can see as we get into 1 p.m. tomorrow, San Diego affected by this as well. That's why I showed that graphic earlier that shows red flag warning still showing up for San Diego, and Santa Anas continue throughout the day tomorrow. So where Northern California is looking good, it's looking in the clear, Southern California, the winds are still going to be strong really till 7 p.m. tomorrow. So it's almost 24 hours delayed of what's going on in NorCal. Then if we push into late Wednesday night into Thursday morning, that's when Southern California finally eases up on the winds. So although there is a wildfire threat right now in Southern California due to these extreme winds, it's looking good because these extreme winds are only going to last another 24 to 36 hours at the longest, and then we're going to get a nice break from these winds. Now, the other factor that plays into this wildfire threat, especially for Southern California, is how dry the fuels are. And there's a few things that we use in our wildfire equations to really estimate fire danger. One of them is the drought monitor. And you can see that areas of Southern California are still considered in a drought. We have abnormally dry, we have extreme drought, exceptional drought in the very eastern parts of Southern California. But it's also interesting to see that Northern California actually is looking worse than Southern California right now. You can see extreme drought, and luckily Santa Cruz, where we actually do have our fires right now, is just in that moderate drought to severe drought. I know that's not exactly something to be happy about, that we have severe drought, but gotta look at the silver lining somewhere. At least it's not extreme, right? And that's actually something interesting to look at, that NorCal is in a worse drought right now than SoCal. I would not have guessed that, but this is one of the things that factors into our fire danger rating systems, so it is something to keep in mind. The other thing that I honestly think is even more important than drought is just the fuel moisture of the vegetation. In other words, how much water is in the plants. And it's separated into 3 categories. You have your 1,000-hour fuels, your 100-hour fuels, and your 10-hour fuels. Now, basically what that means is it takes 1,000 hours for these fuels to feel the effects of the moisture in the atmosphere around them. So these are much larger fuels. It's like a log or a very thick branch. So it takes longer for it to lose moisture and gain moisture. And looking at this, you can see NorCal, when it comes to these larger fuels, is actually in a pretty good position. We're above 20-30% when it comes to the fuel moisture of our vegetation, whereas Southern California is still in that moderately dry range. Now, when it comes to the 100-hour fuels, these are fuels that will be affected by the humidity around them over a 100-hour time span. These are much drier for Southern California. You can see we're getting into that extreme category where it's below 5%. And to picture these fuels, imagine a branch about the size of your wrist. That's what's considered a 100-hour fuel, as opposed to like a log for the 1,000-hour fuels. And you can see here, majority of the state is in that moderately dry range, and then very Southern California in that extreme range. That's why this wind event is something to be worried about for Southern California, because if you combine 70 to 80 mile per hour winds with extremely dry fuels, that's where, if a wildfire happens, it can rapidly spread. And it's weird to say that in January, but unfortunately, this is the situation that is going on. Then the last one is the 10-hour fuels. These are the very fine fuels, things like needles or leaves or very small twigs, and these get affected almost immediately based on the atmosphere around them. And this has actually been getting worse over the last week because it's been so warm and sunny over the last week, and we haven't really gotten any rain. There's not much moisture, and the air is pretty dry. You can see that all of Southern California is in that extreme range, and it's actually even building up into Northern California as well. This is most likely what allowed that fire to start in Santa Cruz. As you can see, even Santa Cruz is in that extreme range when it comes to these very fine fuels. And the big reason for that is how much moisture is in the air and just the relative humidity. So the first thing I thought when I saw all these fuel maps and it shows how dry everything is I wonder if there's any rain on the way. Because rain, if it moves in, is most likely going to have really raise the relative humidity, and then you can return some of the moisture into those fuels to make fires less likely and spread less rapidly. But looking through here, Tuesday, Wednesday, no rain for California. If I continue to click through, you can see we might be getting some rain Thursday at about 4 p.m. in very northern parts of the state, and then possibly getting into the South Bay 4 a.m. on Friday, but this is a bit far out in the forecast, and I wouldn't get too excited about it yet, as it does look like light rain if it even does end up happening. So that's something to keep our eye on, though. Thursday, Friday, there could be a nice little rain event for the Bay Area, maybe some snow up in the Sierras, but again, that's far off in the forecast, so not going to trust it too much yet, and it's not really going to help us with those fires going on right now. Now, in Southern California, the major thing I wanted to look at was that very southern part of the state here that actually had the flash flood warning right here. And so I figured there must be some decent rain building in, and you can see some of that rain showing up at about right now. So I'd almost be interested to check some of the observations to see if this rain is in fact happening. Looks like it's going to be continuing through about 10 p.m. tonight. And wow, going through 4 a.m., actually getting a little bit stronger. And then lasting through 10 p.m. on Wednesday. So while there's not really any periods where I see really strong rain where we're getting into that yellow or orange, the reason we have that flash flood threat is likely due to the fact that it's really sticking around for maybe 24 hours where it'll just be able to continue to pour rain over this region. Now, what I was hoping was that more of this rain would be getting into the coast here, especially where the Santa Anas are the strongest and the fuels are the driest. But as you can see, starting at this morning and then moving in throughout the day today, this whole area along the coast that I'm the most worried about when it comes to wildfire seems to be excluded by the areas that get this rain. So that's something interesting to look at and something important to keep our eye on, because that's another thing that really affects the moisture in our fuels. Again, relative humidity, another huge one, and you can see possibly why those fires started in Santa Cruz. We got some dry air over us right now, but there is some good news. That relative humidity should be rising up tonight, which will bring in some much needed moisture. At the exact same time, the winds are dying down. So I think those 3 fires we have in Santa Cruz, we should be able to get a handle on over the next 24 hours. I really think the worst is behind us when it comes to the wind event for Northern California. Now, when it comes to Southern California, I am still worried because this dry air is going to be sticking around a little while longer. And when you combine that dry air with those 60 to 80 mile per hour winds, and then you combine it with these extremely dry fuels, that is cause for concern, which is why we're doing this forecast in the first place. Now, part of that dry air is due to those warm temperatures we've been having this whole last week. If we look at the highs for today, you can see 60 degrees in San Francisco, 60 degrees in Santa Rosa, and then if we look at tomorrow, about the same. And then if we look at Southern California, you can see Los Angeles 62, actually a lot cooler than yesterday. I think it was around 74 yesterday. But if we look at tomorrow, could be getting back up into the 70s. So I'm not really worried about Northern California anymore. If you have any takeaway from this video, that should be it. I think the worst of the wind event is behind us. Even when it comes to those 3 fires in Santa Cruz, the winds are dying down right now, and they're not picking back up for a while. Humidity is rising up. Not too worried about NorCal anymore. Really, my area of concern now is in this area between Oxnard and Riverside, where those Santa Ana winds are just being funneled. And you can see those Santa Ana winds gusting maybe 60 to 80 miles an hour are combining with extremely dry fuels and dry air. So just to show that exactly what I just said, looking at NorCal, this was 10 a.m. You can see still extreme winds, even 40 miles an hour in San Francisco. 4 p.m. still showing that they're sticking around, but then very rapidly dying off, and then by tonight, basically gone. In Southern California, it's a little bit of a different story. Well, it's a similar story in what is going on, extreme winds dying off. The only difference is it's offset by about 12 to 24 hours. As you can see, 10 a.m., 4 p.m. still have 65 mile per hour winds, 57 in Riverside, and then they're sticking around a little while longer. Getting into 10 p.m. Tuesday, you can see we still have 50 mile per hour winds in Oxnard. Los Angeles, it says 31, but as you get higher up into these elevations and some of the drainages and canyons, that's where you can get still 50 to 60 mile per hour wind gusts. And you can see select areas, especially down here in San Diego area, and then also this Santa Ana corridor, that's where these extreme winds will be sticking around until about 10 p.m. Wednesday. So, like I said, winds in NorCal should be dying around by 7 p.m. tonight. It's going to take about 7 p.m. tomorrow for them to die down in Southern California. So that's pretty much the gist of what's going on. We have extreme winds over the last 24 hours. Let's get back to here just because I think it's a decent summary of what's going on. Extreme winds in Northern California took down some power lines, took out my power, took down some trees, dangerous for driving, started 3 fires in Santa Cruz that have forced a number of evacuations. We got the China Grade Fire, we have Freedom Fire and Panther Ridge Fire. But as we move forward in the forecast, the winds will be dying down in Northern California, and those fires shouldn't be a problem for too much longer. And then when it comes to Southern California, you can see these extreme winds will be sticking around a little while longer, mixed with very dry air, very low relative humidities, and the red flag warning is still in effect for that area. So that's basically the summary of what's going on. I'll hopefully do another forecast tomorrow morning as long as my power remains on. And I'll do a checkup on that red flag warning in Southern California to see how that situation has developed. Thanks for watching.